Big show tomorrow. Here's Chris.
Chris Cuomo here. Welcome to NewsNation. The man who murdered the CEO has been caught. But there is a lingering threat that we need to wake up to. Now, on paper, the story here is that this 26-year-old murderer looks like the ideal. Valedictorian, Ivy League, friendly, ambitious, curious, even known to be kind. Many are wondering what his mental illness is, when it happened, and how did the family not know, or did they know? I don't know that there's any mental health issue to blame here. You do not have to be sick to fall prey to bad ideas and be a bad person. Please believe me when I tell you the man who did this is not as scary as those celebrating what he did. I told you there is a new byproduct of magnified minorities on social media and appealing to the fringe on each side of the political spectrum relentlessly, with millions of hits and data points and bits and scrolling again and again. And now we are bearing the fruit of the poisonous tree of division. This murderer decided to be a terrorist driven by a new fundamentalism that is taking root right here. Online, just go look for yourselves. There is a growing fan base for a felon. His name isn't just trending. Free him is trending in all caps, and from time to time has more traction than the name itself. Now, most are anonymous, something we got to deal with when it comes to social media. I'm not sure how, but some are not. Can you believe wanting to openly endorse an assassination? I have never seen a killer celebrated before. The ignorant see this as coming from the left. But any fool who says that is just that. Probably just seeking advantage in this stupid binary battle that is making all of this more present. Just about advantage. Pitting this case against the Daniel Penny reaction. He was acquitted today, Daniel Penny, the guy who was choking the man in the subway who was threatening other passengers. We'll talk about that. But it's just stupid to do it. And they're feeding the problem. What is going on here is not about left-right. It's about no longer being reasonable about solutions. A rejection of norms and systems that are now seen as the problem, and anything you have to do to make it change is fine. And what is seen as an acceptable remedy is coming home to roost. Look, it's not wrong that people are going off on insurers for a system they believe to be rigged against the rest of us. The pricing, the process. I'm sideways with one right now over a surgery they won't pay for. I've covered the problem for over 20 years, and I'll be honest, little has changed. And while President-elect Trump complains about the ACA, even the great disruptor himself keeps the insurance companies' names out of his mouth when it comes to whom and what to take down. That's how much juice they have. But there are others who are taking his talk and walking it way further. Just like with this murderer, the calm, the comfort that he and they take in the idea that they don't condone the killing. Even the shooter apologized for the pain he caused, but they all agree that it was necessary. You know who else says that? Islamists and every other group of terrorists that think violence is okay. So we're going to talk about how this guy who had every reason to be part of a beneficial solution decided to be part of the problem at its worst. Okay, what do we know? What do we need to know? Well, the more we learn about the young man who murdered 50-year-old healthcare CEO Brian Thompson last Wednesday, leaving his wife and 2 kids lost, the more unlikely a murderer or even a terrorist he seems. Now, the charges after his arrest in Pennsylvania, they make perfect sense. Forgery, firearms not to be carried without a license, tampering with records or identification, possessing instruments of a crime, false ID. That's everything they had. That's everything. But of course, this is really a case about what he did here in New York. And they're going to bring homicide and maybe terror charges. Now, why am I not saying his name? It's all over the place. Because I don't believe he deserves the mention. I'm not saying that you're not going to find his name. I'm saying that the less attention you give these guys, because they don't deserve the light. We just got to understand what they fell prey to and how to stop it. Because this guy, the hypocrisy is always so immediate when you look at these types. He's against the corporate machine, but it's okay that his family reportedly owned nursing homes and were very, very wealthy. I guess those businesses are never abusive, right? I guess that wealth is okay. And he was okay hating the corporate man, but shopping at Starbucks and McDonald's, where he was apprehended in Pennsylvania after an employee recognized him. A person who believes in doing the right thing brought down one who does not. When police approached him, listen to this, Mr. Take It to the Man. He didn't own it. He gave them a fake ID. And when they ran his ID and they started asking him questions, he started to shake. He was quiet, and the officer said, "Why'd you give us a fake ID?" He replied, "I clearly shouldn't have." So much for wanting to take it to the man. A coward when confronted. He was much more bold on paper, though. Cops found a nearly 3-page manifesto which railed against the healthcare industry, and rightly so. It read in part, "I do apologize for any strife and trauma, but it had to be done. The parasites had it coming. I acted alone. I'm self-funded." To me, the scariest part is that a self-radicalized lone wolf who's feeding on malignant ideas and somehow has just lost the plot of what morality and being better is all about. He was found with a black 3D printed pistol, what they call a ghost gun, 6 9mm full metal jacket rounds, at least one hollow point bullet, a silencer, also 3D printed. Also bags found that are utilized to block the transmission of cellular data. So for all the shine on his resume, the first clue to what may have warped all he learned in school about right and wrong is an X-ray that he posted of fused discs in his back. You see him down there? Plate, screws, holds it in place. Very common surgery, but can go wrong and can even add to the pain. You couple this with our understanding that he hadn't spoken to friends or family in months, and many were reaching out to him on social media. You got an injury, you got isolation. Now, what led to this other ingredient of buying into violence as a way to create change? Like the Unabomber, whose book this guy reviewed favorably, highlighting that protest has done nothing, as if violence is some kind of immediate alternative to protest. That is something you better get more used to hearing about, by the way. I'm telling you, there is a new fundamentalism, and it is taking root right here. Now, I'm going to bring in one of his high school classmates. But first, I want to play you a clip of this murderer as a high school senior, valedictorian.
The parents here today. First off, sending us to Gilman was far from a small financial investment. I'd like to personally thank each of you for sending your sons here, as I can't imagine the class of 2016 without any one of these men on stage.
He was giving his valedictory. It's Latin. It means to say farewell, and he's going away for a long time. But how did he get to where he is right now? Joining us in silhouette to protect his identity, and I get it, is a former classmate and friend. He's worried about how people are responding to this situation and what it may mean for how they feel about him. So he wants to hide his face. We'll do it. We're also joined by someone else who recently lived with the shooter, R.J. Martin. They lived together in Hawaii. He knows him, had fallen out of contact recently. So let's bring them both in and understand better.
Hey,
all right, we're doing just audio with the other guy. R.J., thank you for being with me. Do you hear me, friend, on the telephone?
Yes. Loud and clear, thank you.
All right, so I got you, R.J., and I got the other guy. Just help people understand, guy on the phone. Why are you so worried?
Well, Chris, I think you bring up a great point in that what we need to be focused on here is the tragic events that took place with the CEO, Brian Thompson, and him losing his and his kids and his wife losing him. And I think, looking back at, we can jump into Luigi's life in high school. I think one thing that you didn't quite get across is how brilliant-minded he is. He was the valedictorian of our high school, but he didn't put in much effort at all. He was he would sit there in class, not study after school, and ace the tests. So he was an extraordinary mind. He was a a very popular person in the class, had a lot of friends, and it's just shocking that he would commit such a heinous act.
No, I get it. And that's what makes it so compelling. The kid seemed to have everything going for him, and he wound up being the worst of us. Now, RJ, when you met him, he was already in his 20s. And where was he at that point in his life, and what made him stand out to you?
He applied to live at Surf Break Co-Living, which is a co-living space for remote workers in Hawaii. And like so many of our members, he wanted to be healthier, enjoy the tropics, live a new life in Hawaii. And I actually did the first interview with him. He talked about being excited to meeting new people, getting healthy again, because he mentioned he had a back. I don't know if it was an injury or pre-existing, and that he was doing everything he could to, not be in pain. When he moved in at Surf Break, I had founded the co-living space. We were actually roommates together. We weren't super close at first, but he was always friendly with everyone. But as time went on, you get closer with people. I took him to yoga classes. He actually helped found our book club. We read through a handful of interesting books together. He was just always a kind person, great listener. Somebody that, you would enjoy having a cup of coffee with. And I just can't imagine that this is the same person.
How long ago did you fall out of touch?
We talked earlier this year after his surgery. And then I think our last text messages were this summer.
Did you notice any change? Did you notice any change or did you hear word of anything that people were uncomfortable with about what they saw or heard in him?
Not at all. Not at all. All the people that, we lived together with and that we were still friends with and that I've spoken to today have nothing but extremely positive things to say from him. Anar is just shocked and crushed as I am that, something like this, that he went about something like this. It really seems, from the person that I lived with, it seems unimaginable. It's not like the people who say, oh, I can't believe the person next door is a serial killer and they've got bodies buried. He was a genuinely generous, kind person. He'd walk people home at night. He was just thoughtful.
And you never heard him discussing his concerns about corporate America or what happened with his own healthcare experience with his back or anything that would even give you a hint that he had developed a darker understanding of the world?
No, not darker and not aggressive and not violent. I think that it's obvious to most people that are aware that many of the systems that we live within don't benefit us as well as they could. And, those are normal intellectual conversations and discussions that we have. And he and I had many of those kinds of intellectual conversations, but never anything remotely towards violence. He was never aggressive. I never even remember him once being upset.
How would you describe his political thoughts?
I would say just open-minded and progressive. If you gave him data, he would quickly absorb that data and be like, oh, that's an interesting perspective and a new way to look at that, that issue or that problem. He is very much data-driven. I didn't recall that he was the valedictorian, but he was definitely one of the sharpest minds I've ever been able to interact with. And that's why we hosted book club together and had great conversations philosophically.
What would you say to him now?
God, I just want to cry. I just feel horrible for what he did. And I feel horrible for, this just wasn't the way. If there, I think you mentioned earlier in the show that you've been fighting an issue with your healthcare provider. And we know that we have democratic methods, we have systems in place and ways to address these problems. And I would say, Luigi, this is not how we solve our problems in America. We don't storm the Capitol. We don't shoot people that we disagree with. We have systems in place and we sit down at tables like you and I are sitting down and we talk respectfully, whether we agree or disagree.
He made it less likely that we're going to get the kind of change that system needs right now, because there's going to be a sympathetic pushback. Right now, you have all of these ghouls celebrating what he did, but that's only going to add to the resilience of people who say, well, we see who the good guys and the bad guys are. RJ, thank you very much. Classmate, friend, what would you want to know about you, the guy that you knew, in terms of how he wound up doing and being what he is now?
I want to know why he thought there was no other way. When I think about Luigi, I think of him as somebody that was capable of running or starting their own, biotech firm that could have helped cure some of these illnesses. And the fact that that mind is now going to spend likely the rest of their life in prison is very sad. And to echo RJ's point, I'm just really saddened by the whole thing.
Thank you very much for coming forward. RJ, I appreciate you as well. And we're going to see. There's going to be more on this because it's not just this guy. There are a lot of people who feel the same way, and now we have to wonder if they're willing to do the same things. Let's bring in retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent James Galliano. Jimmy, we both know that the period of analysis is going to be what happened in this quiet period when he had this surgery and he went quiet and people couldn't find him. Did he get hooked on the painkillers? Did he start taking in other information that had influenced his processing? But what do you make of my larger understanding that there is a fundamentalism taking root in this country? And you can point fingers in lots of different directions about people who've been stoking the angry fringe on social media. But do you believe that this kid is, this young man is evidence of a bigger phenomenon?
Yeah, Chris, how many sites of on-scene mass shootings have you and I stood on together, reporting on and talking about things like this? This has the classic earmarks of what? Grievance collecting. And that's somebody that sees something or senses something that bothers them, and it's a very fringe extreme that moves to the level that this young man did, where he would actually take these ideations. Obviously, you talked about it at the top, the anti-capitalist zealotry, if you will. There's always a certain sense of hypocrisy here. You got a young man who came from a well-to-do background, went to the best schools, and then decided he was going to act this way. Look, you can go back and look at his social media. You can look at the people that he's quoted before, the Ted Kaczynskis, the Unabomber case, and some of that. We got to take these people seriously. The problem is the rabbit hole. If the FBI or local police follow every crazed lunatic that says something online, there's not enough of us to do that. It's the ones that have the propensity for violence. And did anybody, Chris, see this coming? You just had on two people that spoke to him, some that knew him and that could talk about what he was like before. But what drives somebody to go from, hey, I'm upset with the healthcare industry, I'm upset with pay disparities, I'm upset with the rich, and then drive somebody to do this? Chris, it's a leap I don't think anybody could have seen coming.
It's going to come down to that period, but it's going to be a distraction because right now online there are tens of thousands of people who are saying, let him go. He's a hero. Now, a lot of them are anonymous jackasses, but not all of them. And I'm telling you, all of this, fear them. These people you can't trust. This institution is no good. There is a byproduct, and now we're going to deal with it. Jimmy, thank you very much. Appreciate you. There's going to be more to come on this. I'll be leaning on you, and thank you for the help you've given me so far. Let's take a break. 4 minutes and 5 seconds. We'll be back. Now, look, I don't get the compare and contrast that people are doing with this case and Daniel Penny, okay? I guess certain people are upset about both ones. Whatever. It's a totally different set of issues. The jury has spoken. Penny has been acquitted. Now, there's an interesting legal question about how'd they go from split on manslaughter to agreeing almost instantaneously to let him walk on a lesser homicide charge. What is it really about? That's what this case is about. Who are we becoming? What is right? What is wrong? The victim's family and a lot of other people disagree. Let's hear both sides. Our 4 days of deliberation. The jury in the Daniel Penny case comes back pretty quickly today and says, not guilty. Remember, the first charge, manslaughter 2, had been dismissed with the approval of the district attorney. Very rare. The charge today was criminally negligent manslaughter. Very low criminal burden for homicide. And yet, they acquit him. We know the case. The chokehold death of a black homeless man named Jordan Neely on a New York City subway. Penny claims, along with the two guys who were helping him on your screen right now, that there was a female passenger and others who were afraid because of threats Neely was making, and they decided to subdue him. And this is what happened over the course of the many minutes, almost 10, that they had him. This case was just as much about where we are as a society and what we value and what's okay and what isn't okay as it is about the particular facts of the case. So that larger question is going to resonate, and you're going to see protest, especially from the BLM movement. I want to get both sides of this. Dante Mills is the attorney for the Neely family, and he joins us now. Counsel, thank you very much for taking the opportunity.
Chris, thanks for having me here.
Counsel, what message are you worried this verdict sends?
That we don't value everyone. It's clear that no one is saying Daniel Penny was wrong for stepping in, and I think that's the misnomer that people have. We're not saying that. This incident took place it was over 30 seconds. Within 15 seconds after Jordan Neely got on the train, Daniel Penny came up from behind him. People said they were afraid. He took him down in a chokehold. 10 seconds later, the train comes to the next stop. Everybody gets off. We're not saying anything about that. We're talking about 2 minutes later, 3 minutes later, 4 minutes later, 5 minutes later, up to 6 minutes when Daniel Penny is still choking Jordan Neely to death. And people are saying, let his neck go, you're going to kill him. You see the video of somebody holding Jordan's hands. That person came up to Daniel and said, I'm going to grab his hands so you can let his neck go. When I grab his hands, let his neck go, and he didn't do that. That's where we're saying Daniel Penny took it too far. This isn't about whether he should have stepped in the beginning. It's whether he took it too far. And my fear is that we don't value people like Jordan Neely enough to say his life is worth being defended in that moment, and somebody should be held accountable for taking his life. It doesn't matter if he was homeless, if he had a mental illness, he still had value. And Daniel Penny did not have the right to go that far and take his life. That's the entire argument.
Give me one step sideways about the family's perspective on this. How do they explain how Jordan Neely came to be in this situation? Where was it that he wasn't properly medicated? Had they tried to help him, but he just couldn't stay in the home? Was he impossible for them to deal with? How did the family wind up in a situation where their loved one was, doing whatever he was doing on the train that scared other people?
Absolutely. And Chris, if we're having an honest conversation, we all have demons. Jordan Neely had demons. Jordan Neely's mom was killed when he was in the house in middle school. And he had to testify at the trial because the person who killed her sent him to school the next day, put his mom in a suitcase, and threw it on the side of the road. He had demons, a lot of them. And who's to say every homeless person is not loved? That's not true. You don't get a mental illness sometimes from not being loved. Of course, Jordan had family that really loved him. He had a lot of family that welcomed him into their home, but he had so many demons, he didn't want to be there. And just because that happened doesn't mean his life didn't have value or that he didn't have family that loved him. I have family members that deal with mental illness. Some that we would welcome in our home, but they choose not to. That doesn't mean that they should be killed, and the person who did it should not be held responsible. So, of course, the Neely family was full of love. But unfortunately, Jordan had some demons that he was dealing with, and it came from a lot of hurt and a rough life that unfortunately wasn't addressed before he got on that subway.
I'm not blaming the family, and I'm not making any excuses for Jordan Neely. Whatever it was, it was. I just wanted some context for people to get a better feel for the situation. How do you justify, you say, Daniel Penny took it too far, should have been punished. Do you believe that society sends the right message if Penny, because you say the two guys said let him go. There's more to their testimony of that, right? As we see in the video, those two guys were participating in it. They certainly didn't try to actively stop Penny. They said lots of different things, but they stayed with him through all of it. And we're not doing, Dante, what you or I may have done, which has been like, enough, get your arms off him, I'll hold him down a different way. They didn't do that, and it could have led to Penny's understanding that what he was doing was reasonable under the circumstances. Do you allow for that in the reckoning of this jury acquitting today?
Well, no, because one thing a lot of people don't know is the man who came on the train that has that hat on that's holding Jordan's hands, he wasn't on the train to begin with. He got on the subway at that station. Once the doors were opened, and it's 2-3 minutes later, he gets on the train and says to Daniel Penny, I'm going to hold his hand so you can let his neck go. I don't think that is a reason why Daniel Penny should have continued to keep that hold on Jordan's neck. And in fact, I think, and it's proven, because when Daniel Penny talked to the police officer shortly after, Daniel Penny said, I held him, and as soon as someone came and told me they had his hands, I let his neck go. He lied about that because he held on to his neck for 3 more minutes, but he said that because he knew that's what he was supposed to do. If someone is there is no longer a threat, just let his neck go. That's all we're saying happened here that went too far. We're not questioning whether Daniel had good intentions coming in. I think he did. I don't think Daniel's a racist. I don't think it has anything to do with anything like that. Mm-hmm. I just think he took it too far. But unfortunately, because Jordan was homeless, because he had mental issues, a lot of people didn't value his life enough to stand up for him.
Maybe. Dante Mills, I appreciate you articulating the argument. Thank you for doing it. Send my regards to the family. Again, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just trying to understand how we got here. Thank you very much for helping me out. All right, now let's get the perspective of why this verdict does make sense given the context of everything that happened in the case. Former FBI special agent and defense attorney Stu Kaplan, been following it from the beginning and helping me from the beginning. Stu, how do you explain for the audience, they're split on manslaughter 2 for days. They go home, they come back, and they acquit him like that on a lesser charge. How? What happened to the people who thought man 2 was the right charge? How do you explain this?
Well, first, Chris, I want to applaud Mr. Mills. It's the first time since the inception of this case that the attorney for the family has come on and has so well articulated, truly, and he says he doesn't believe that Daniel Penny was a racist, and he does believe that someone should be held accountable. And to that point, there are 2 arenas in the United States. One is to hold someone criminally responsible, or in a civil arena, hold them civilly liable. And I think when you look at the manslaughter 2 charge, and the reason why the jury got hung up, that's a very technical type of charge with respect to that the person who engages in the perceived unlawful act must have perceived or intended that he realized at some point was going to cause the death of Jordan Neely. And I think that was the hiccup with respect to the jury. I also find it interesting that after the verdict was rendered, that the jury was not polled, or anybody hasn't been able to take the temperature of the jurors to find out where or who or how many were hung up on that particular case. Because as you said, right after this morning, within a very short period of time, they came out and rendered a not guilty verdict. So that is a very interesting thing. I just think the negligent aspect of it, or the negligent homicide, is a much easier set of facts to grasp, and I think rightfully so, because, Chris, my personal opinion is that Alvin Bragg should not have brought these charges. Now, with me saying that, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that necessarily Mr. Penny gets a clear pass or a pass with respect to culpability or responsibility, but I think this should be in a civil arena and not have been done in a criminal prosecution.
But a man's dead.
Chris, people are killed, unfortunately, all the time. Especially we see this in motor vehicle accidents where someone is driving a car at an excessive rate of speed, or unfortunately blows a stop sign or a red light. Every time someone runs a red light or a stop sign, that doesn't necessarily make them criminally responsible. It may make them civilly responsible, but we don't typically throw people into jail for maybe making a mistake under certain circumstances. And I do believe this would have had a tremendous chilling effect on anybody who would ride the New York City subway to say, if I see something the first thing I'm going to do is wait for those doors to get out, to open, and I'm going to run out because I'm not going to get involved. We don't want that. And just as we saw today in Pennsylvania, we want people to see something. If they see something, say something. Right. Get involved.
Yeah, we also want cops in the greatest city in the world that has tens of thousands of cops to be there a lot sooner than happened in this situation. Stu, thank you very much. I appreciate your take from start to finish on this one. To be continued.
My pleasure. Happy holidays. Thank you.
You too, brother. 4 minutes, 30 seconds. Coming up. So Trump gives an interview. I was actually going to do a whole open on it tonight about how what happened in this interview is exactly the problematic dynamic that we have. And I'm not going after the journalist. NBC did the interview they're supposed to do, but the question is why? What I want to talk about is what's the rationale for what we all know is coming? Representative Jim Jordan is going to be a major player in what happens out of the gate in the Trump administration. I want him to take me through his thinking on why what I believe is going to happen is the right thing to happen. Ohio Republican member of Congress Jim Jordan is the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, joins us now. It's good to see you. If I don't speak to you before, Merry Christmas to you and the family, Jim. All the best for the new year.
You too. You too. You and yours. Same here.
So let's just keep it tight. You and I will have a rolling conversation once the session starts and you guys are in. You're welcome here whenever you want. Why is it worth another round of investigating the people who investigated you guys?
Well, there's a long tradition, Chris, for Congress to take a look at special counsels. I mean, the Democrats did it with Mueller. Then there was, Robert Hur that we looked at and had him come in front of the committee. And so we will definitely look at the report Jack Smith brings forward. We will look at the report David Weiss brings forward. We think that's important, particularly when you think about some of the concerns that have been raised about each of those investigations and what it means to our justice system. Specifically with Jack Smith, we know one of his lawyers said to a counsel for one of the defendants in the case in Florida that he said, one of his lawyers said to the defendant's counsel, "We didn't know you were a Trump guy. We thought you were interested in this judge position." Almost this veiled threat. So it's like that needs to be investigated in and of itself. So we will definitely look at that. And then David Weiss, we had the two whistleblowers that came forward and told us about all the things that were wrong with that investigation, how political it became. So we need to look at all that. But that's just consistent with how Congress always operates with special counsels.
I know. I just think that it's a mistake. That's why I'm asking you about it. And you'll remember, I felt the same way about all the stuff I suggested was going to happen with Biden. And you did all those investigations, and I don't know that it left the country in a better place the same way I feel about the Trump investigations. Do you worry that you are continuing a cycle of just attacking the other side and not doing the people's work?
No. No, I think we have a constitutional duty to do oversight. It's part of our responsibility as members of the United States Congress, part of our responsibility as the legislative branch to do oversight of the executive branch. We should do that vigorously. We should do it as much as we possibly can, but we should do it in a fair way. And I'm not looking, President Trump said this in his interview on NBC this weekend. I'm not looking for any type of retribution. We're just looking to get the facts out there and make sure that in the future, our Justice Department operates in a way that's not political. And we know that's not the case. We know that has not been the case. It has been political in going after President Trump, and frankly, I think other conservatives as well. So we want that to stop. We want equal treatment under the law. That's how our country, the greatest system ever, the greatest country ever, that's how it's supposed to work. That's my focus. That's our focus. So it's not about retribution. I think President Trump said it best. He said the real retribution is winning for the country, success for the country. And success for the country is certainly a Justice Department that is not political.
I hear that. How are you going to improve the Justice Department with these investigations?
Well, I think getting to the truth so that it doesn't happen in the future is important. But also, maybe there's something we need to do with their budget. We're supposed to deal with the budget. Here's an example. The FBI's budget is somewhere about $11.3 billion. $6 billion of that budget is for intelligence, counterintelligence, and domestic terrorism. I think most Americans would think, really? I thought the FBI was supposed to be going after gang activity, organized crime, money laundering, all the stuff that you typically think of the FBI. So why not focus on where it's supposed to be? And where it's supposed to be is non-political, not surveilling the American people, but actually dealing with the bad guys on the street. Let's focus on that. not going after your political opponents.
I'm fine with that, but you are going to be going after his political opponents. He said in the interview, I think everybody on the January 6th committee should be investigated. Why? They were just doing their job. You may not like the job, but it's the same job that you guys did.
I'm for doing what the Congress always does, which is look at the special counsel, what they've done. They're going to give us a report. Chris, we'll take a look at that report. We may have Jack Smith and David Weiss come in for a hearing. We'll have to see. But we need to examine that. That's how the system works. That's part of our responsibility under the Constitution. So we're gonna do that. That's not retribution. That's doing our job and making sure our Justice Department, as I've said, is not operating in a political fashion like it most certainly did with President Trump over the last 4 years.
Listen, I have been an outspoken critic of the New York cases against Trump. I don't believe that goes for all of them. I was an outspoken critic of what was happening with the Russia probe because they would never remove him from office. So why put us through the exercise of an impeachment? But I will tell you, I'll be watching what you do. You're always going to be here to discuss it. I just think the country has had it and wants you to work on immigration and the economy. And if you want to watch where the money goes, I think that's acceptable. But we'll see how you do it. And I appreciate you coming on to give us a little advance warning of what's coming.
Okay. We'll be back. Thanks, Chris.
Jim Jordan, be well, and thank you for coming on and taking the opportunity. Up next, 2.5 decades of the Assad regime in Syria. There is a maxim when it comes to international relations that has been ignored here. If you're going to take somebody out, you got to think about what or who fills the void. Assad is out. Syria is going to be arguably more dangerous for the Middle East and for us. Yes or no? Two people who know the region and the reality. Next. Those Syrian rebels have ended the brutal 24-year reign of Bashar al-Assad. Some are calling it the fall of the Berlin Wall in the Middle East. I don't know, but I have two better minds. Granddaughter of a former Syrian prime minister who was killed in the 1949 coup, my friend Arwa Damon has covered this regime and the region as well or better than anyone for a long time. And Geraldo Rivera, been covering the region also for decades, made multiple trips to Syria. Good to have you both. Arwa, what do people need to understand about what just happened?
People need to remember what happened over the last 13 years and the hundreds of thousands who were killed, the tens of thousands who were detained and then disappeared, and exactly what it is that Syrians themselves went through. People also need to remember that at this point in time, the rebels that took over, the military maneuvering that we saw, the political maneuvering that we're seeing right now is very much based on lessons that have been learned by watching what happened in Iraq and Libya. And Syrians are not going to very easily squander this opportunity to actually build the kind of country that they want. They have lost so much just to get to this point.
A quick follow, Arwa, the idea that these rebels are Islamists and that this is going to be a proxy terror group in the making there, that these people may be free of Assad, but they will not be free, as we understand it.
Look, no one's under any delusion that this is going to somehow be easy, but we also need to appreciate the evolution that HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, has actually gone through. Yes, of course, its leader, Jolani, was a part of al-Qaeda in Iraq. He was jailed in Iraq. He was then jailed in Syria and released at the start of the revolution. But he himself has undergone something of a metamorphosis. Now, whether or not his rhetoric and his more recent actions are just lip service or actually something that's going to be true, again, that remains to be seen. But when you talk to a lot of the Syrians that fought for freedom and democracy, they say that if this regime does not end up being what they want it to be, they will keep on fighting. And I don't think we should take away from what it is that Syrians have accomplished in this moment. And I don't think that we should take away from the euphoria that they are feeling right now, even though, yes, of course, there is still a lot of anxiety. But the big message you're also hearing from Syrians to the outside world, to countries, to leaders, especially to the United States, is stay out of it. It's going to be messy, but it's our mess, and we want to be the ones who fix it.
Well, they will find a very receptive ear in President-elect Trump. He wants to go nowhere near it for exactly that reason. He says it's not our problem. Geraldo, what's your perspective on what has happened and what will happen?
Well, I don't necessarily share the joy of the Syrian people. I am delighted that they're not being killed by the brutal dictator Assad. But this fellow Jolani, Ar was a great reporter, but this fellow Jolani will be the first head of state that has had a $5 million bounty on his head. U.S. reward against him. It was $5 or I think it was $50 million reward. He was a prisoner in our notorious Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. He's Al-Qaeda through and through. When have they ever moderated over any kind of time? I don't see any reason for optimism. I think they've traded one horrible Alawite leader, a Shiite leader, essentially, for a Sunni radical leader. I don't see how the United States is benefited at all by this, by the ascension of Jolani and this Al-Qaeda offshoot to take control now of Syria. I think it's more trouble. It's bringing the terrorists closer to the center of power. I think that this is, I hope it works out. I understand Israel is expanding its hold over the Golan Heights, expanding the territory it holds as a buffer with this new Syrian government. We've already recognized a good portion of Israel taking over Golan Heights, which was Syria. Trump recognized it in 2019. But this guy Jolani, this is a bad news character, Chris. You remember Abu Ghraib prison. You remember this guy was an enemy of the United States. We fought him.
I remember bad things happening in that prison also. I'm with you. We got to hold it there.
Right.
Because we need more facts on the ground. And I got to go because I'm out of time. But I appreciate you setting the table in Arwa. Always invaluable perspective. You want to help the kids on the ground in Palestine? INARA, INARA.organization, okay? Look it up. It's Arwa's organization. You want to help? That's how you help. Donate there. Geraldo, thank you very much. Arwa, I love you. We'll be right back.